Content over everything.
Central talking points, particularly when we're talking about maybe the right wing, but we call it the right wing. Feminists have called it for a long time toxic masculinity, and now it feels that as I'm getting older, I'm starting to draw a lot of links between the kind of when we talk about patriotism, when we talk about nationalism, when we talk about the one capital that seems very consistent and in contention is the power and the possession and the rights to women's bodies. And earlier we were talking about the legacies that women's bodies kind of allowed to push forward. So you can only have the next legacy if a woman allows you to procreate with her. Now, when we hear about all of these narratives, particularly narratives where it's frustrated young men don't have any significance in existence, but they're looking for a purpose, they're looking for a reason to exist, there seems to be, again, the concentration on what women are doing as a social class and where they choose to sleep, where they choose to work, where they choose to put their finance. And I just wanted to get everyone's kind of input as to what in particular do you think drives men to be so controlling towards the female class, because right now they are treated as their own class.
I see it in economic terms, and when you talk about economy, exploitation is the key word. When the money is in the hands of always the same families, the same banks, the same individuals, you have a polarization of power and automatically injustice, because these people are not certainly thinking that it's immoral to be a multi-billionaire in a world of starving multitudes. They think that is the will of God. Full stop. You can discuss the will of God. And most probably they are atheists, but they know how to sell a product. They are business people. Sell what stupefies. Sell what people want. Make people wishful thinkers. That this is hell, but tomorrow will be better. I am only a working class poor guy in a sweatshop or in a restaurant at McDonald's, but I am entitled to have a dream that one day I will be petit bourgeois. You know, I'm a dirt poor working class, but tomorrow is around the corner, I'll be a petit bourgeois. That is the mentality. Once that mentality is widespread on a world scale, then you have a situation where women themselves believe that it is very wrong to abort a child, even if you can feed the child, even if that child will end up in a war and being butchered, you know, like a dog in a horrible war that only makes money to the same bunch of 225 people, the richest people in the world. But you tend to accept that because it's the will of God. There's nothing you can do about it. So the world is ruled by the self-induced mentality of helplessness, of no solution, nothing will ever change. And the fact that they control the reproductive system of women is because they need more and more slaves. The more the slaves, the least the jobs, the more desperate people that would do anything for just breadcrumbs, in exchange of breadcrumbs. If the world, on the contrary, is petit bourgeois and is well off, has enough food, a place to live and some kind of expectation for their future and the future of their children, then where do they find the slaves? In the factories. Where do they find the slave labor of Indochina and India, Africa, all these places. This is child slave labor. So the more the children, the more the bees to be robbed of their honey. That is the situation.
But would you say like we have to make these like say British companies like that they should be forced to hire in UK rather than going for cheap? And if they're in British, if they're in UK, they shouldn't be allowed to hire like cheap labour everywhere else. Should be hired
there are
in
laws.
UK, you know, because they're UK companies.
Well, there are laws thanks to the Labour Party. These laws were not made by the Tories. The Labour Party made it illegal
Trade
to
and trade
hire
unions.
child labours and trade unionism, of course. So when you talk about, oh well, in Europe at least we are more advanced, we safeguard the children and don't really feed on their sweat and blood. It's thanks to the class struggle. We were in the same shoes of Indonesia, Southeast Asia, India, Africa, Latin America. We were having only 100 years ago children, 9, 8-year-old down the mines. Down the mines. You know how many struggles there were, industrial action outside the mines, because the work of the mine is the worst. A child has small lungs. To breathe all that coal, it means it will maximum survive another 10 years. And I've seen when you visit the mines of United States, yeah, look at that, yes. Yeah, look at that, all black, even the bones are black. You know, I
that
went
was
to
a big problem back then.
visit the mines in Pennsylvania. There's a lot of coal mine, and it's heartbreaking to see these children, because they have photographs. No, there were no films back then, but they have photographs with these children down the mines with a little shower or some kind of special device where they can take off the coal but not the rock. Right. Because if it is also rock, is worthless, you know. And little hands, you know, trying to make their little bucket of coal. I mean, it made me burst in tears. You know, I have a heart. It made me burst in tears. Like when my grandfather died. When my grandfather died, he called me. He was the only one in the house. He said, please come here. And I don't feel well, and I am dying. And I said, no, you are very strong. You're a tough guy. And he said, well, I'm not really dying because whoever has comrades will never die. Remember Che Guevara told me, and it made me cry. Remember Che Guevara, right when they arrested him, the Bolivarian police that was working for the CIA, he said to his comrade, to the other comrade, because 10 people, 12 people were arrested. He said, you might get away with it, but I am the one that transported revolution also in Algeria, in Congo, you know, was international. He said, you might get away. Remember one thing, tell your children to keep on fighting, because I will live in them. As long as they keep on fighting, I will be alive in them, you know. And so to see these children in the mine, digging coal, and with a little container of iron for the lunch, you know, lunch, a soup. And they were, some of them were more lucky, and they used to be warden of the exit of the car. Car were exiting, so they would sit there all day with this little bowl of iron full of soup, and you know, just surviving like that. But I was crying. Other people also were crying because they said, "Oh, we never knew this. We have to bring our children to show how lucky they are." It's worse than being in a concentration camp. What kind of dog life?
And I was gonna ask, because you brought up trade unions and you brought up obviously the labor policies of not being or not supporting kind of like child labor. I just had a conversation with a lady just over there, a very young girl, and she was raising the point about Extinction Rebellion. And for me personally, I've always thought the younger people to be a little bit more empathetic towards movement. They have the time, they have the ability and the resources to research, whereas older people may be at work 9 to 5, they come home, they have their family obligations to do. However, I was surprised to find that, well, surprised but not surprised to find that she had a very negative outlook towards Extinction Rebellion. Now, I guess the idea that, or the notion that I've got from a lot of people recently, especially when I counter their kind of talking points and ask what they hate about Extinction Rebellion, it often seems to be a character assassination, something of the personal traits, never really acknowledging the deeper kind of issues, never really acknowledging the deeper kind of empathy towards why they're doing what they're doing. We seem to have divorced ourselves from workers' unions. We have divorced ourselves from unionizing, and it's worrying for me, because unionizing is the bread and butter of privilege, the privilege that we have today. And if we look to get any more privilege or better society or standards of living, then we need unions, right? But unions everywhere, even my girlfriend works in the union, and wherever you go, unions are being attacked left, right and center by corporations, the businesses that they employ them to kind of look after their workers. They make it very unattractive to be an activist. And being an activist was never going to be easy, because you are taking away someone's money by disruption. But do you find it worrying that the younger generation seem to be taking on the side of more of these corporate entities rather than the empathy of their own fellow human beings?
Yes, it is very worrisome. You know, I have a grandson that is thinking of just becoming an artist and do something on his own, because he said whatever is out there is really another form of child or young people exploitation that is hidden, but is really bad, especially because it's hidden. It is, for example, you get out of get your GCSE, you go in the labor market, tons of applications, and then why they do that? The job center is the biggest betrayal of the young people, because instead of saying, at the moment there are no jobs, no, they make you fill so many applications, always give you the illusion that, tomorrow is another day, you will get something, and you keep on going back day after day, and you lose confidence, you lose hope, you understand they are cheating you with all these applications, and you just remain so desperate that you become apathetic. When you reach apathy, the alternative is homelessness or incarceration or reformatory. You know, there is no real outlet for a big chunk of the youth. For example, how do they teach history? History used to be taught years ago when there was not this absurd concentration of wealth at the top, it was little more distributed. So they used to teach history like an evolutionary process of the human race, that from hunter and gatherers they tended to join in communities and be agricultural, and then after agricultural become some kind of communal power, a small landlord, and the community, obviously being robbed of the surplus, but still quite a humane way of living and working. Then you have to, once you talk about 2 million years. After those 2 million years of evolution, you have another type of society that is called feudalism, where the big feudal lord controls all the surplus. After feudalism, obviously there will be another stage which is early capitalism. That was still quite fair because it was competitive capitalism. So they were forced to keep the prices down to compete against other capitalists. Once we enter into the monopoly stage of capitalism is when humanity got the worst of deals. Not only in poor countries, but also in the north, so-called global north. Because the global north cannot really advance any kind of industrial action or any kind of meaningful trade unionism with a certain contractual power against exploitation because they are all scared of losing that miserable job. And they don't teach this in the school. That is the tragedy. So I taught my grandson, look, try to understand evolution, because if you understand evolution, you will become able to make proper judgment of a situation. But how can you make proper judgment? Only if you become able to see reality. If you cannot see reality, you will be always used as the last starving bastard that must live on breadcrumbs and jump in air with joy because he's got some breadcrumbs. When there was no communism in Europe, people were living in kind of cellars, dirty, filthy, full of moss, and they would die by age 35. Even the women, they were decimated. And on what were they living? On the leftovers of the rich. The leftovers of the rich, entire families living very short lives because they had nothing to eat except the leftover of the rich. And sometimes the rich used to be very vicious. Instead of throwing the leftover food, they would heat the coins on the fire, metal coins, real coins, on the fire. And when they were incandescent, throw them on the ground, and all these people would jump to get these coins and all get all burned to the bones, Just to tell you how cruel is when you give power to human beings. When they have power, they become mad. They become sadistic and extremely sociopathic. They become like sociopathic, like serial killers, sociopaths. And so, if they were teaching history like a class struggle, the class struggle obviously didn't exist when there were hunter and gatherers, because there was no surplus. A hunter and gatherer cannot accumulate because has to continuously move. I see them. If you go to Congo, because I have friends in Congo, in French Guinea, in Kenya, in different parts of Africa. I stay free. This is the elite, unfortunately, but I let them stay free in my house in Venice, which is a palace. I stay free in their palaces, And so what's happened, I went in the savannah. They call the savannah, where there are only hunter and gatherers. And very nice people. Can you imagine? They are so nice. The men, when the woman is going to gather fruits, that's the job of women, they put their babies on their nipples, so they to calm down the babies. I mean, they have a care of babies is you will never see nowhere else. They have a humanity that we have lost completely. But why? They don't have any surplus. They continuously commute from one place to another. Obviously, when you hunt, sooner or later you have killed all the animals and you have to move somewhere else. And Congo is huge, it's a huge country. They called it Zaire, but it's so huge that you have I mean, it's the biggest number of hunter-gatherers in the world. I mean, there are hunter-gatherers all over Latin America. For example, Venezuela, which is a very big country, there are the Pume, also hunter-gatherers. They live exactly like the one in Congo. You go to Australia, same thing. They are same people. You really understand that the human race is exactly the same. We are not different, except when money and power comes in. But if you talk to those in Congo, the Pume, the Australian Aborigines, the New Zealand Aborigines, they are very humane and they are all the same. Even if you don't understand what, it's difficult because they don't speak English, so it's very difficult. But they make all the drawing on the floor and they try to be very helpful. Some places, especially in Guinea, New Guinea, not French Guinea of Africa, New Guinea, they are quite dangerous people. If you have a chance to watch the French documentary, it's called the Mud Below, Sky Above, and Sky Above, Mud Below. And they show that these people, they are those that Magellan, one of the was from Portugal conqueror, when they call it La Isla de la Mala Gente, because they chop the head and shrink the heads. Still now, heads. Because they are the only hunter-gatherers. They are a bit naughty, very warriorsome. But in any case, when you go to these communities, I took a chance, I risked. You have to do like these French people did. They went into these jungles and you have to let them touch you because they touch. They cannot believe. They are maybe afraid that you have leprosy because your skin is different, or they always touch you. But not malice, they don't touch your breast, they touch your face, your neck. So you have to let them. Another thing that you do, take the leaves and eat them because they eat leaves. So you have to do exactly what they do. Once they realize that you are like them, you are most welcome. They are not going to chop your head and shrink it. They only do it because there is small land and there are rivalries on small resources. But they are not bad people. So my idea is teach children history the way it should be taught. We are a species into everlasting evolution. From hunter-gatherer, which is 2 million years, the majority of human history, to our days when I would say 13,000, I would say probably more than 13,000, probably 100,000 years, we started to become, instead of hunter-gatherers, we became communities of agricultural type, and that's when the curse came in, because the biggest, the most arrogant, the most nasty started to pile up the surplus.
A lot of people agree. It's
and
when
that's
it starts,
when women were defeated.
Yeah.
The defeat, Engels said, historical defeat of the female sex started when the agricultural society came into existence. But if you have a chance, go to Congo. It's the most amazing experience you will ever have. Beautiful people, humane. They treat their children like jewels. Those children is the biggest possession they have. They don't have any possession, but their children is something that they worship as if they were gods, and they are not spoiled. The children are very respectful. They are very fair to their parents. If the parents say don't do that, the children restrain themselves. Why? Because they see the other children doing the same. We always copy each other.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
and so I sent a letter to the school of my grandson, and we'll have another one more year next year to get his GCSE. He's doing very well because he's very politicized, but because he's politicized, they put him in the corner. They don't want any Marxist, they don't want any leftist, so he's treated very badly.
Yeah.
And I told the school, teach history in a way that the children will become able to see reality. Why do you keep on teaching First World War, Second World War, possible Third World War, which is only violence and butchering? These are capitalist wars. Why do you teach Tudor, Royal? Who are the royals? They are what? 0.1% of world population. Why do you teach all these royals that were always also killing each other? You know, the bigger lord was killing the smaller lord. They teach violence, then they complain that
They are
children...
the original thugs.
Yeah.
When the children go out to school, they punch each other, they have fights, but because they teach a history of violence.
right.
It's normal that the child becomes violent and eventually end up stabbing and killing other children.
And
We
I just
usually imitate the environment we're in.
yeah.
So if you're in a violent environment, you're going to imitate that. If you're in a humane environment, people again will inspire, and then
Yeah.
Yes.
On a further level, if you're in a competitive
Yeah.
environment as well,
There
you're
you go.
seeking
There you
the
go.
best way
Yeah.
to advantage yourself in whatever scenario
Yeah.
you are in. I
Yeah.
was gonna say
Yeah,
the
exactly.
teaching of history, particularly in schools as well. I was reading quite recently because it was on the whole topic of male possession of female bodies, and it's on the similar theme. Just the fallout of what happened after World War II, and we don't talk
Yeah.
about this in particular, especially from a female point of view. During the occupation of the Allies, France, the USA, UK, Russia as well, a lot of the women experienced probably one of the worst periods in history when it comes to freedom, caring and chivalry. And I think, ironically, we teach World War II as a triumphant story, a story of victory, a story of fighting for freedom, the big bad Nazi, etc. But for a lot of German women, a lot of Polish women, a lot of French women in particular, that wouldn't be the story, because the majority of them, or a good number of them anyway, were subject to a mass of male violence. And this was from these same forces that claimed to have been liberating and freeing them. And for a long while, this wasn't publicized, this wasn't talked about, it wasn't addressed. America went as far as to try and create brothels outside of the kind of like city of the nations in order to deter certain kind of like assaults, rape, etc.
Yeah.
But even then, they didn't want to do that because word would get back home to all of the wives, because
Yes.
they had to keep this, this middle class, very kind of noble idea of what the war was about, or the war struggle effort was about. Now, do you think we're ever going to get to a point where we can be historically accurate about what happened in the world wars? It's not to take away and say that Hitler was a great guy, but it also would have it that the people who were liberating weren't particularly very nice guys either. The idea of 8-year-old girls having to hide in, blocks and flats and farms, etc., to avoid being raped by European soldiers is completely, it goes against every notion that we fought in World War II against the tyranny of Hitler. So when we teach history, are we ever going to get to a point where we can be unpolitical about history, particularly here in the UK, where our patriotism is based on pretty much the whitewashing of history to suit the British
Yes.
imperialist narrative? So I'm just wondering, how do you tackle that when it's such a mass indoctrination?
Yeah.
And what you said is fact. And when we hear, as you said, the history, what we're taught, wherever they go, they say, we went to India, they were uncivilized savages, we went to Africa.
Yeah.
the only thing we actually hear is we went to America, they were uncivilized, they were savages. We went to India, they say the same thing. Everywhere they go, they say we civilized these people. But now archaeologists are actually uncovering that some of these societies were quite advanced, you know. European archaeologists, they said, no, this is not true. The Indians had an ancient civilization. In South America, they had ancient civilizations, yeah, you know, and we're told that these people were uncivilized and they were savages.
But this is the worry. I'd say maybe the modern day Marxist, leftist, socialist, etc. The idea that history is not clear, the fact that you have to desanitize certain arguments and certain conversations that you have with people with actual historical knowledge that has completely escaped them in history class and just general indoctrination of nationalism and patriotism. When we talk about the Americans, we talk about the fact that the Americans are travelers, not a bunch of pillagers, rapists, etc., you know, who completely decimated the land, brung a population to a minute point, and you know, to the point where in a couple of generations natives probably won't exist. We won't have any talk about native history. The difference is other populations have been so big that, you know, to genocide them would be absolutely impossible, but they were conscious efforts to get rid even of those big societies as well. If we talk about Congo, there was a massive collective effort to try and, you know, sanitize the land of these people who had inhabited and, you know, generated like agriculture and societies and civilizations for years and generations. So it's worrying. How do we get to the point where history isn't political? Because right now it seems that history can only be political because the person who is on top, or the class who is on top right now, it benefits them to indoctrinate their mass into a hero savage kind of like narrative. So like you were saying, we were the heroes, we came in, we saved, we conquered, etc. We saved these villages from themselves. When it's ironic, because how can a society exist a whole length of time being that savage? Like they would have killed each other off a long time ago. So there is, even within our own teachings, there's a bit of a historical idiocy. But
so when do you think he'll start?
It seems that we don't even have the critical thinking to maybe address some of the teachers that are teaching us this stuff. So I mean, how would you, I guess, go forward, trying to maybe tackle the education system, but also tackle other people's ability to be critical? I'm wondering, do you think that stems from the lack of empathy, or do you think that generally people just believe they are different to
the
others?
last time he was here, he said he's going off to organise.
What makes history, what backs history is history in many ways is a science in many ways. You actually need archaeological evidence to actually back up your claim. And what we see a lot of imperialist history is just, you know, someone just writing nonsense in a book, you know, saying that, you know, these people, they've invented nothing, they've done nothing. In fact, for example, in the founding fathers in America, the first settlers in America, they were actually saved by the Indians. They actually taught them how to grow agriculture. But I was like, well, if these people were savage, how come they didn't attack you, you know?
Absolutely.
So
even that history is rather tragic in the sense that it does seem that there is a nature of hospitality when it does come to venturing Europeans. And I think, you know, ultimately having a venturous side is just humanity's kind of like birthing trait. You know, we migrated from the Africans to X, Y, and Z population. But it just seems that when we do talk about these situations, it doesn't seem to click with certain people that Europeans were allowed to settle in certain places without such a massive uproar of, you know, competition for resources, competition for capital, etc. And you not find it slightly ironic that we are now in an age in which the society that claims itself civilized seems to want to close up borders now and instill fear in terms of, like, you know, freedom of movement when they've enjoyed that privilege for so long. Like, how do you think we can help?
for example, as you said about borders, you know, this border, what humans dividing ourselves with borders is. This is like a very primitive sort of ego, you know. This is very uncivilized. It's not progressive at all.
Absolutely.
You know, And yeah, now we have the age of technology. There's no need for borders and territories. You know, we can actually find better ways in feeding, clothing, and housing ourselves.
Absolutely.
You know, and it will actually be much easier with open borders. You know.
But that's the thing, and I think the lady was obviously talking about the hoarding of resources and the elite constantly kind of like striving to want to claim, I guess, resources for themselves, and it's the idea of living in a surplus. Sorry, that's what you were saying. In a surplus.
Yeah.
We've become addicted to surplus, and it's with no justifiable kind of like reason. Like, we live in a fairly stable society. It's fairly stable for, you know, through exploitation, what have you. But we also now have the means and the resources to communicate with each other when there is a lack of resources. You know, there's various charitable organizations that go across the world and give aid, etc. And I just find it weird when people talk about, obviously, the idea of no borders. They talk about the depolitizing of peoples, races, religions, etc., regions of the world, you know, because like you say, it's almost a very primitive kind of like, this is my side of the bedroom, this is your side of the bedroom. Let's stick to each, you know. You know, electricity runs out on one side. It's like, oh, okay, you stay on your side. It just seems very primitive for, you know, a civilized culture that claims itself to be civilized.
Yeah, but we have to also take into account that we are all interlinked. We see ourselves as individuals, but in reality, we depend on each other. No matter how much autonomous you want to be, non-biased, and be a person of principles, if you are in an environment that is based on biases, it's very difficult to resist the temptation to become biased. You know, it happened to me. It happened to me. When I was talking 4 weeks ago, before going to India, about the fact that the north of the globe, let's say Europe, United States, Australia, Canada, we are dwindling, we are in decline. I don't use the name even ethnicity because it doesn't really mean anything. Or race, even worse. The worst thing you can do is to use the word race. There's no such a thing as race. You cannot define a person on the basis of bone structure or the way he walks or talks. But I would say, I would divide humanity into more affluent society and society that are struggling from hand to mouth to survive another day. And affluent society populations are in decline. It's very strange because the affluent society, basically the majority, have access to food, to schooling, to health care, to amenities that lengthen our lifespan. So, because we live longer, we should increase in number. We are declining. The natality in affluent society is 1.7, not even 2 children per woman. While in poor society, nothing really to live for or to have at least a decent corner of existence, they are increasing. The natality is 4 to 4.5 children per woman. So it seems a paradox because their mortality is much higher, lifespan shorter. Just think about Africa, India, where in Africa alone, more than 1 million women die every year because they cook on open fires, you know, breathing the fumes. Yet, they are increasing. And when you have some kind of little better life expectancy because of some social services, is decline. So it seems absurd But even myself, I got caught in the trap of biases to try to explain something. Because when you live in an environment of bias, you think, well, maybe that's the meter of measure to look at reality. But when you look at reality with bias, you use morals. Morals are subjective. They are very difficult to figure out what morality is because it's very subjective. My morality is different from his, from her, from him. We have our own way of deciding what is good and what is bad, and it's strictly personal. So when I try to explain why, when there is more welfare, there is less expectation or a less expansion of the population, I ended into the bias of saying, well, if women are more educated, they produce less children. It is just a partial vision of the problem. It's not really a problem, but I mean, you try to explain something that seems not explainable. And what's happened? It seems that the human drive for survival is much stronger when you have to fight the odds. Much stronger drive for survival that we have lost. In fact, we have far much higher suicide, far much higher crime, much higher statistics of degeneration, alcoholism, and all this kind of turpid sex, lewd sexuality, and much more twisted minds into sadism, masochism, and all this aggression, because masochism is aggression also against yourself, but is aggression. So it seems that when there is welfare, the afflictions of the mind dominate people. You see? So you cannot use bias saying, oh, women are more rich, more educated, they have less children. That would still be a bias. But if you say the affliction of ego, greed, lust, anger, what is the attachment, are far more the suffering of affluent society. And I believe that's the reason why affluent society are declining. And India, Africa, even China with 2 children policy, it's still increasing incredibly well, especially Africa by 2. Now Africans are only 1,200,000,000. By 2015, 31 years, they will be 2 billion. So they are very successful as per survival drive, or survival drive in the sense they just have a strong drive for survival, but it is induced by the struggle to survive. If you don't have to have a struggle to survive, the survival drive dies off or dwindles, That's how I explain it. But let's eliminate biases. They are very wrong, very dangerous, because when you use a bias, like here in the park, they punch each other because it's based on bias. My God is better than your God. My race is better than your race. You are an idiot, you are a peasant, I am a city dweller, It is what creates the violence and by consequence the dwindling of a society that is numerically incapable of triggering the drive for survival because of some kind of benefits that we enjoy. And we enjoy it because there is obviously Trump, England, that go and rip those people off. That's why we enjoy something a little better. But we were in the same shoes of these children of third world countries, dying and having a horrible existence. We were in the same situation only 100 years ago in England. If you go to France, only 70 years ago. Go to Italy, only 50 years ago. The children were starving. They were collecting, picking up with showels in Naples, with showels, the dead body of children that died in the night by starvation, hypothermia, or whatever, in Naples. So,
I've got to go because
Yeah.
I'm cold.
yeah.
But it was a really lovely conversation. Thank you. I'll see you later.
Okay, see you. Very
after
nice.
yourself.
Take some more. Give it to your
I
girlfriend.
have 4. She's gonna enjoy
No, but
this.
this pocket
They're all
can
here. They're all
contain
here.
some. Take.
Thank you.
They go wasted.
Oh.
Yeah, from India, by the way. I just
From
Come, man, say it straight. Man, don't listen to BBC. Man, don't listen to ITV. Listen. COE. Man, don't listen to BBC. Man, don't listen to ITV. I don't even listen to Sky YG. I just listen to COE. Man, don't listen to BBC. Man, don't listen to ITV. I don't even listen to Sky YG. Man, just listen to COE. Man, just listen to COE. All of them are the